What's up, guys? It's Cashew. Today I'm going to talk about something totally different from my other videos. This is just going to be another ramble about some League thing. I do like the idea of making more in-depth like breakdowns of games like Beifeng's Kiana game. If you have a good suggestion of a player you want to watch, comment it. I'll go look, see what I can say. Um, but what I want to talk about today is role swapping. I got to thinking about this because my team, I coach an amateur league, like college team. We're like diamond level on average. We have some masters players, we have an emerald player, and we just had somebody go into the top lane. Before this, he was our support for a while. He had to leave, actually during the CLOL, the Collegiate League tournament, and he was the support at the time. But he's coming back, and he's coming back as the top laner because now our top laner has left to his work's picking up and he's got finals soon. So, um, he is right back to playing. We put him on Jax, we put him on Kennen, put him on Cho'Gath, and he's really uncomfortable in the lane. Even though he used to play top, he played top for like a good number of years before he ended up picking up support and came over to us as a support player. So, why does he suddenly look so uncomfortable when he's got games on it? He's got games on top lane. He's played top lane recently. Like, his match history has some games of, like, I think Jax specifically, he's played some. Tom Kench, he's played some top lane, right? So, what do you lose when you switch roles? Because you don't lose any of the knowledge. What you do lose is access to it. So, humans are not good at remembering things they don't remember often. When you call up a piece of knowledge, it's easier to call up that piece of knowledge in the future. You kind of reinforcement learning, right? It's like, oh, my pike hook does 200 damage, and every time you use it, it does 200 damage. You're like, great, now I always know pike hook does 200 damage. Well, if you stop playing pike for a really long time, and the items change, you come back to pike, even if you play a couple games, you're like, maybe this does 200, 250 right now? I'm not sure exactly, right? And maybe you misjudge the amount of damage it does. Same thing applies to every part of League of Legends, and parts of your life that aren't League. Like, if you took a course in college and you've ever heard the words cumulative exam, you take an exam the first 4 weeks and it's on a thing, and then you move on. You take the next exam over a different set of subjects, and the next, but then your final exam goes through all 4 exams, and very often the stuff from the maybe first half of the year is the hardest stuff to remember. Same stuff, right? So in League, that's what you're doing. You're basically forcing yourself to take another exam on a part of the game you haven't interacted with in a long time. You haven't studied, right? Even if the studying is just playing games, you haven't felt out the waves. You haven't had to call up the matchup knowledge you're used to calling up, right? So it comes slower. Even if you know all of it, the speed at which it comes up comes into your brain, and the speed at which you can access that information and use it, apply it, is much slower. And that causes indecision, means you're slower to go through your plays, or when you go through your plays, maybe they happen late. You'll miss flashes or be indecisive about flashes. You'll take a tower dive and die much more often, right? Um, you'll get ganked because you're not paying attention to your fundamentals. And maybe the biggest one is your CS will be lower. You will always just have lower CS because you haven't kept the muscle memory of exactly when and how you can hit people, right? How do you hit minions? How do you get gold, right? Your pattern of your champion isn't locked in. So part of the reason I'm talking about this is because I want to think about how to recall that information more quickly, talk about the tools that we have now in League to do that, and I want to talk about skill, like what these kinds of concepts mean for skill, right? What does it mean to be somebody who can play multiple roles versus only one? So, obviously, based on what I've said, straight up, I think that the ability to play multiple roles means you're better at League of Legends. The reason that I think that is because I think it means you have better fundamentals, and that means that you can switch characters, you can switch roles, and you still understand your game plan very quickly. Typically, if you can switch roles and characters easily, and it doesn't really affect your gameplay, you also have the information to play against more things, right? You're less likely to lose to one tricks, to cheese picks, knowledge checks, and your average ability to win and to not lose are things that make you better or worse at League of Legends, measurably, right? If you are constantly winning, your lane, that's one thing, but that could often be your own ability to knowledge check, right? Like, a lot of Diamond Yasuo 1-tricks have, my guess is like between a 70 and 90% rate of being ahead coming out of lane. but they lose games because they don't have the knowledge of what the opponent's champions do, right? If I'm a Gragas mid one trick, and I am, I don't like implicitly know this is how much damage Yorick does if he hits me. I just know that Yorick counters my champ, and I don't ever want to see it. So how do you like move around that? Well, one of the easiest ways is to have a practice partner. Might have thought I'd say Vauderview, especially if you're one of my friends and you've talked to me all the time about this. But Vauderview actually doesn't help that much with this. Watching somebody else play your champion can be useful, especially if they're better than you, right? Watching challenger players is a great way to learn. But like watching your own VODs back doesn't really remind you of the things you need to be reminded of, because it's not about the information, it's about the speed at which you access it, remember? So play some practice 1v1s against someone who can help you. They do not have to be better than you. They also don't have to be worse than you. They can be anywhere in a skill bracket where you have to think through your plays to win and have a chance of winning, right? So like, if I'm talking about a Diamond 4 player trying to pick up a role they haven't played in a while, I would probably suggest like someone Emerald 4 through like Master 0 LP maybe, right? Beyond that, you kind of start to struggle. Under that, you're not maybe getting the practice you want to get because your champions aren't being punished as aggressively. But there is an amazing tool now for doing this, right? The practice tool exists, and the practice tool is incredible, and it's multiplayer. You can play through 5 minutes of a lane. You can restart it. You can start the lane at 8 minutes, engineer a wave state. Like, you and your partner collectively can fuck with the minions to engineer a wave state, and then practice playing through that, right? Like, there's so much that you can do in the game based on just the practice tool, and you can condense practice much, much more effectively than you can in, like, a live game. In a live game, you could be ganked by, like, 2 games in a row, your practice games, right? You could be ganked heavily by a jungler. And let me be clear, that does not mean you should lose your lane. If you're a good player, getting ganked by a jungler doesn't mean lose, right? It doesn't mean lose lane, doesn't mean lose the game. What it does mean is that you're not practicing what you want to practice, right? I'm not getting good practice on, like, my micro trades of Jax versus Clyde or whatever the hell. I'm getting the, like, reminder that I have to play around a gank or play around an objective, or, like, you know, I'm just stuck, like, slow losing this lane and I have to learn how to manage my resources. But maybe I don't need to practice that. Maybe I really, really need to practice my hands. Well, you can do that in practice tool. What else can you do? Well, you, hear me out, can play Arena. Arena is not good for learning what champions do damage-wise, but it's very good for learning play patterns. If you play against good Arena players, they will always try to access their character's best play pattern. Good Arena here does not mean the same thing as in, like, a good solo queue player, where most people who say that are thinking, like, Masters Plus. Like, y'all have probably watched silver players individually play a trade well. They may not have taken a good trade, they may have misplayed it, and they may have misplayed the other 10 trades, but they understand the play pattern of their character. You can play against good micro players in Arena and get a lot of practice there. To a lesser extent, Earth can also do this because it lets you warm up your own plays. It lets you warm up reaction times, it forces you to get the muscle memory in your head of, if I press this button, this thing happens, right? What if you have all that locked in? Well, the multiplayer practice tool isn't even relevant for this, because my next thing is go into the practice tool and do the exercise. The exercise is, if you're a solo laner, go buy your 1 starter item, and without resetting, without using a single ability, auto-attack minions and try to get every last hit for 8 minutes. Sometimes this will also require you to do wave control. You'll have to hit minions early to prep them for yourself. You'll have to try to figure out how to bounce the wave so that it stays under the enemy turret less or under your turret less, right? And, like, without a champion, obviously you're not practicing proper wave manipulation, but you are practicing proper last hitting. And you're only practicing proper last hitting. You're creating muscle memory. You're creating that quick concept of, oh, I need to do this. I need to hit this minion 3 times because my auto attack does 70 and it's dying to the cannon. Whatever. And if you do it, you know, every day for a week, it starts to become second nature to suddenly realize, like, you just think, oh, I need to hit this minion. And it changes the way you look at the lane, because you start prioritizing individual CS less and the way the lane moves more, because you're already paying attention to the individual, or you're not paying attention to the individual CS. You've already created the muscle memory to do it. Finally, I'm going to say it. This is going to come from This is hard to do, but you need to play fives if you want to learn these things more easily. In fives, flips happen less. You spend more time in a tight 1v1 focused lane, or more time moving to 2v2, 3v3, 4v4 skirmish objectives, especially in the first 20 minutes, than you do in solo queue. In solo queue, a lot of what you have to learn is how to keep your lead and how to play around the cheese that your opponents are aware of doing. In fives, there's much less of that and much more of a focus around resource control and putting your opponents in bad situations. So if you're constantly paying attention to when you get put in a bad situation, you lock in how to not get punched like that more. And that tends to be, in my head, that tends to be intrinsic understanding of this position starts to feel bad. It's like, oh my god, I'm over a line I shouldn't be over. And in solo queue, you may never get punished for it, but in fives, you will instantly, even against like Plat Emerald teams. This advice isn't relevant to most people, right? Because how are you going to just magically find a 5 squad? But there are actually a lot of places you can do that. If you look up, like amateur league 5s, right? There are a lot of Discord servers of relatively large leagues. The Risen Esports is the one that like I'm most aware of, where they run tournaments and they run leagues, so weekly play, and they do it in draft formats sometimes. So like you can put your name in there, put your profile in there, and say looking for team, and you can just randomly get into a team of essentially randoms that want to play what is more competitive, more streamlined Clash. And you can do it whenever you want. So I guess this kind of ended up being a, hey, go play fives, it's better than solo queue post. Just in case you haven't been watching enough Lost Artonis to realize that. But, yeah, it's hard to suddenly pick up a completely different way to play the game, right? And it's even harder to acknowledge that the way that you want to play right now is not a way you can play now, but it's a way you used to be able to play. This is something I've struggled with. My brain damage means that I just can't play mechanical champions as efficiently, and I often go for a play and then die, because my hands just don't work. And so I'm trying to acknowledge, my hands don't let me do this, I have to do something else. And, like, in Master GM Challenger, I couldn't do that, right? Like, you have to execute, or play a different champion. But, most of the time, I can take the time to make the, like, safer play or whatever, because I'm acknowledging my own weakness. Maybe that's the last thing. When you're in a game, acknowledge that you aren't as practiced on the champ as you used to be. If you've played 1,000 games of Fiora, and then you switch to ADC for 3 years, and you're going back to Fiora, you're not going to be as good. And not just not as good, you're not going to be nearly as good. You're going to be out of practice on things you don't realize you're out of practice on. Your E resets probably aren't going to be as quick. Your ability to take towers is going to be lessened because you're not going to properly identify which lane you're supposed to be in as quickly. You're probably going to manage your teleport incorrectly, which is something that most top laners do because it's just really hard to use TP perfectly. But like all these things that aren't playing the champion itself, but come from playing the champion, right? Meta knowledge of where you're supposed to go and how you're supposed to hit minions and all this stuff. You being used to an auto attack animation. I don't know. It's all stuff that you really have to just play games in some way. You have to play League of Legends to lock in. Yeah, that's it. See ya.